My name's Pete Saronis. I'll be your kind of host, but also contributor to this discussion with my amazing guests. This is the Internet of Things discussion, and we specifically came up with a tagline, a new era of innovation, efficiency, and growth. It's not something new, but we may use some buzzwords. My colleagues in the background will use the chat session to put any buzzwords we put in there. We will be referencing a very significant document, a report that came out in October of this year, aptly titled Report of the Internet of Things Advisory Board, and it's got a wealth of information, and we will be referencing it throughout. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and briefly introduce my guests, who will then talk a little bit about their passion and what brought them to where they are. And for our guests online and listening in, whether you're in sales or business development or marketing or academia, I can hear an echo, but if that is something we can fix, that would be great. Thank you. I would love it if you can appreciate our goal today is to convey how IoT supports a mission, not just at the federal government, not just at the Department of Commerce and USDA. Everybody on this call, from our folks from industry and government, have a perspective. They have a reach, a global reach in many cases. And it's great to have a Chief Information Officer in Miss Becky Kung to give us that perspective, because it is technology at the end of the day. All right, Debbie Reynolds, my colleague, and is one of the 16 members who helped develop this report. You look beautiful, by the way. I love that color. Hails from Chi-Town. Debbie Reynolds, she is known as the Data Diva. She has a podcast. You should all consider checking it out. It's something that talks about everything from the importance and technology associated with critical infrastructure, the report that Debbie worked on. She really focused and was the expert in the privacy data arena. She is on many boards. She is asked to speak all over the world, and I had the pleasure of getting to know her. But again, do some research on Debbie Reynolds, because at the end of the day, this woman understands the implication of cybersecurity, data privacy, especially in regulated industries. So Debbie, it's great to see you. I'm going to come back to you. All right. Now, Miss Laura George, who is the CEO of co-founder, and president of Wallacor Corporation. Forgive me, I got a couple notes in front of me that are kind of acting a little crazy. But Laura George is somebody I got to meet, and on this panel and in this forum that we use for the IoT discussion, but also in the community of interest, we'd like to feature businesses that are having impact, businesses that are small but really are having that mission focus and do something very special. Wallacor Corporation is something we'll hear from Laura around, but Laura, it's exciting to have you and bring that perspective for us, because this is about open government and how public and private partnership needs to work together, because we know that not one silver bullet really is the solution, and we're excited to have you as well. Dr. Michael Dunaway, colleague and friend, Digital Twins, the National Institute of Standard and Technology, Associate Director for Innovation in the Smart Connected Systems Division. Say that 5 times. Awfully impressive, but also it's wonderful to have you, Michael. You come from industry, you've worked in government, you've traveled the world, you understand how the term smart cities really applies to community-driven efforts to improve humanity, and we're looking forward to your perspectives as well. And of course, last but not least, we're joined by Chief Information Officer at the National Weather Service within the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration within the U.S. Department of Commerce, Becky Kung. And Becky, just the fact that we have a federal perspective, a senior executive, somebody who can share that while the operations and the lights need to keep on, stay on, there's focus. And every mission is specifically, and we're excited to hear about NWS and its unique focus and the impact that IoT is having and helping us, provide and offer up data and information, but also being protected. So with that, let me jump back up. I don't know if that's orange or red, Deb, but I'm going to go with my favorite color, orange, because you look beautiful. Can you talk a little bit, take about 2 minutes in each of you. We're going to go Debbie, we're going to go Laura, then we're going to hit Michael and Becky. What brought you to where you are? What influenced you along the way? And really focus on that passion you have for, leveraging technology to move the mission.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for that introduction, and I'm very happy to be on this panel with the esteemed panelists. First of all, I am a technologist by trade. I've been doing digital transformation before it had the word digital in it. So moving people from different types of systems and different types of technologies moving forward. I have had a passion for many years about privacy that started as a personal interest that turned into a business. So I kind of combine that with my interest in technology and how I came to IoT. I was fascinated by a lot of the rapid changes in technology, and I'm a problem solver. And so I looked around at technologies and I said, what can I do on a proactive basis with the technology that I thought needed the most help? And so IoT was what I chose because I feel like IoT had our, this industry or this ecosystem has had its, AI moment, I feel. And now people, I think when people look at the next shiny object, they forget about it. But IoT is so ubiquitous within companies, within organizations, within homes. Even if you ask someone, like this is a statistic I like to tell people, most organizations have more IoT devices than they have computers, right? And so you think about when you log into your computer, you have all these passwords, all these complicated things you have to know and remember. But there may be a device to connect in your office where I consider these things like computers without screens. So they may be doing things that you may not understand. They may be taking data, they're creating cyber risk. So I feel like this is a message that has to be talked about again and again, especially as we see, IoT has grown exponentially and it's kind of blown past all the predictions, I believe, in terms of the amount of devices that people are using, especially with AI now. So the rapid changes in devices and what it can do. So that's what I'm here to talk about.
Yeah, you were putting a lot out there, which I love. So say some of that juice for the discussion. But one of the things that, again, folks, Debbie focuses on data and privacy and how the application of emerging tech, which is moving so fast. And we in government, we in industry, we in academia know that everything is in a zero trust world now. Everything is ubiquitously connected, and obviously we're in a it would be nice if we crawled, walked, and ran, but the reality is we're kind of running and crawling and walking, and we're going to talk about that, how to embrace emerging tech, but also make sure that that data is protected, whether at rest or in motion. So thank you, Deb. Laura, talk a little bit about you, your passion, your journey, and why you love working at Wallacor.
That's great. Thank you so much for having me. So I come from Wall Street, spent over 20 years, really at the sort of the intersection of economic security and now really on the national security side. Um, I came into, from the accounting side, I was an auditor, Arthur Anderson. And I think that sort of gave me the precepts of why blockchain technology is so important in the ledger technology. Fast forward, working off $9 billion of assets for Department of the Treasury, FDIC, Fannie, Freddie, and lack of transparency and trust in data really brought me to where we are today with Wallacor. And Wallacor is a next generation emerging technology that really solves data integrity at that data element, really down to the bit level. Really important when we talk about IoT and devices. We've recently seen some headlines on, even cameras and how data is affecting us in a negative way, and how sometimes the bad boys are in our infrastructure in different places, whether it be on OT or IT. I had a very smart person from the industry tell me once, he said, there's only two kinds of people. One that knows that malware's in our networks, and others that are too stupid to know malware's in our networks. Where Wall, of course, sits is sort of helping detect that with blockchain as one component of 10, but sort of a next generation of security. And honored to be here to talk about some things we're doing on the digital twins and IoT side.
I love it. Thank you, Laura. And folks, when we did our prep call, we had some great chemistry building. And Laura, you hit on, yes, securing data and data integrity, which again, loosely used term, but the provenance of data, the integrity, the trusting the data. Blockchain obviously is a topic that's exciting and can be confusing. So again, folks, we do have buzzwords and we have definitions. We may explain on those. You mentioned AI at the edge in our prep call too, folks. When we think about the AI implications and the cloud situation that we're all in, leveraging the cloud, your data is going back and forth a lot. Sometimes even putting it at the edge sounds great, but it has to be protected. And again, that's something that reigned true or rang true when we were discussing our prep call information. And just to close out, Laura, you hit a lot on the enterprise and architecture approach. So enterprise architecture and architect invest implement, not just plug in a tool, really resonated with me. And we'll dive into some of that, especially with our folks in government who, you know, really understand and respect that that's a key component of any systems implementation. Michael Dunaway, digital twins, yes, cyber physical systems, public sector, safety. How you doing, man? And it's great to have you.
Pete, thanks a lot. I appreciate the introduction. Good to see everyone here, and thank you for joining. Just very briefly, I started my career as a naval officer. I graduated in the Naval Academy and went into a full Navy career in the surface line, and I was a professional engineer there in ships, so shipboard engineering, applied engineering. After I retired from active duty, I went to the Office of Naval Research. I joined an engineering firm that was supporting O&R. So I got very much involved in engineering, research and development work and science and technology, specifically focused on modeling and simulation and decision systems. Right after 9/11, about 2 years, not immediately, but a couple of years after 9/11 happened, I joined the Department of Homeland Security, and I was in the Science and Technology Directorate at DHS. And one of my goals, I guess it wasn't exactly a mission, it was a goal, was to transition a lot of what we knew about simulation and modeling and decision systems and architectures and whatnot from the Department of Defense, where we put an awful lot of investment into this, over to Department of Homeland Security. So we could help communities build the kind of systems that would enable them to better protect themselves, and build collaborations across agencies and across communities. And I was very much involved in community resilience work there. Did that, and then I made a couple of excursions to universities and ran a couple of research labs. But the whole time I was there, from the time I was at Department of Homeland Security, I was working community security in my own hometown, which is Annapolis, Maryland, doing some pro bono work there with the Department of Homeland Security, or the Emergency Management Agency. And I got very much interested in the nexus between preparedness and public safety, and then IoT, we didn't call it that, but basically communication systems and data management and device management for data capture. So that was kind of a natural transition then, when the opportunity availed itself about 4 years ago to step into the National Institute of Standards and Technologies and run a program that was then called the Global Community Technology Challenge, or GCTC. And it's the Smart Cities program at NIST. It's the only real federal program that has been working directly with communities to build resilience and enhance technology integration at the local level. Programs kind of morphed over the last year or so. We're now transitioning most of it into the private sector for the real management of that program. It's not, it's transitioning. My work now is dedicated much more towards Internet of Things and smart systems writ large, not specifically for cities, but just integration of cities, and particularly a lot of work in digital twins, for the specific purpose of how do we make the complexity of these systems that we are building understandable to the people who use them, particularly lay audiences at the community level. So a lot of that is how do you visually represent complex systems in a way in which decisions can be made at the community level. So that's a lot of what that work entails right now.
Well, thank you. And again, obviously, thank you for your service, and love the great city of Annapolis. And it's always a joy to have your perspective, because again, folks, those of you who know what NIST is, what it does, it's 2 miles up the road from me. They write a lot of great documents. Sometimes it's special publication, it's guidance, but it really touches on so many of the topics. And it's why NIST is generally at every seat, or a seat at the table, when you're talking about, whether it's modernization, transformation, and innovation. And I know Miss Becky Kuhn has read many a NIST document. Becky, CIO, your 35 years we talked about, you have your cyber DNA, you're a CIO. Give us a little bit of background and share a bit about your passion.
Sure, thank you. So My last name is typically pronounced Kunji because my
Kunji,
husband was from
okay.
is from Trinidad. So,
Okay.
but a little bit of background on me is back in 1989, I lived in Parkersburg, West Virginia, and I was a newly minted federal employee, part of the student career experience, which later became Pathways.
Go Mountaineers.
So I spent so I spent most of my career at the U.S. Treasury. It's the Office of Fiscal Service, which has been in the news here lately, but back then it was known as Bureau of Public Debt. So spent most of my career in cybersecurity. Fast forward to 2010, I moved to the DC area where I had actually met my husband. And I did a short stint with the Census Bureau and then applied to a job as IT security officer at the National Weather Service. So found myself quite surprised, coming from Treasury, where we had a true IT enterprise, data centers, multiple ones, failover, accounting for the national debt. And I found myself very surprised about just how everything was very more like federated or decentralized within NOAA and even within the Weather Service. And all of our IT systems were essentially firewall in, that were developed around geographical locations and built for a specific purpose, say tsunami warning or space weather, or of course the issuing of watches, warnings, and forecasts around severe weather, or even just blue sky days. So coming from that sort of background, a lot of folks have been like, oh my gosh, wow, this is very complicated. But I really embrace and love the idea of really making a difference. That's why I have been a Fed all of this time and why I'm now a senior executive, because it meant a lot to me to be able to leave things better than I find them. And I'm still at the Weather Service because there was quite a lot for us to do, not only on the cybersecurity side of the house, but just on the IT side. And, which is bringing us to now like a huge transformation of how we do deliver our mission. So it was a powerful mission. It fit my needs. And I think it was just such a great opportunity to really take a look at what does the Weather Service mission hinge on, and IoT and operational technology is a huge part of that, from radars to buoys out in the ocean, to data from satellites, it touches every single component of the way we work and live here in the United States of America. And we partner with a lot of entities and international communities and governments across the globe. So, so the future, I know we're going to be talking here later about, current and future state of IoT. So yeah. I have a lot to share there, but really appreciate the opportunity to be here today. Thanks.
You bet. Thank you. Kunji, you should have told me that in our prep call. I'm saying Becky Kung. It's like Kunji. I get it. I like it, Okay. So before we pivot back, Deb, and I'm going to throw the first question at you, I just want to emphasize, and again, for my folks or colleagues that are online, we're going to use some buzzwords. One of them will be operational technology. Miss Becky Kunji said that is something we may talk about, because the mission of the National Weather Service, at least when I was doing my research, right, I kind of knew what it was, what it is, but providing weather, water, and climate data, forecast warnings, and impact-based decision support services. That should resonate, right? How we're going to collect this data, how we're going to be able to make predictive modeling decisions so that lives aren't lost. So critical infrastructure, the protection of it, the sharing of data and information is all baked into the promise of IoT. And yes, I might even enter into the discussion of the industrial Internet of Things, which, if you haven't figured it out, I could suck the air out of a call, but I will also distinguish a bit about IoT and IIoT when it comes to government mission. So, Debbie, if I may, I'm just going to mention, because again, as one of the 16 selected to advise for 2 years, folks, the IoT Advisory Report is the result of essentially 2 years work of service. There were folks selected as a result of the William M. Thornberry National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2021, which established the Internet of Things Advisory Board. And this was a board that met for 2 full years and drew perspective from government and industry, and is chartered to advise the federal Internet of Things Working Group, or the Internet of Things Federal Working Group. So it's alive, it's kicking, and it's a dialogue that's continuously in place. So if you download the report or you click on it and you sell into or help purchased through government, this gives all of the promise, the opportunity, and some of the risk associated with the decisions around IoT. That being said, Debbie, and I would like all my guests to comment similarly because it's a general question. When you think of IoT, Deb, there's that risk and then there's opportunity. How do you balance that when it's, coming to the discussion of data? Because people could say the sky is falling and I don't want to trust anything that's not in my computer locked down behind a firewall. But what is the risk and opportunity when you're explaining IoT to the consumer?
Great question. Part of the risk is really understanding the scope of what the risk can be, right? So let's say you bought a toaster, like an old-fashioned toaster that you just plug in, right? But then you connect it to the internet. Now you have like a fancy toaster that has all these other risks, right? So it's creating a new vector of attack that you wouldn't normally have. And so as we see people move through transformation or transformation journey, you really need to think about that from a consumer perspective and also from a purchasing or a government perspective, right? And then in terms of the opportunity is that, these connected devices can do so many tremendous things. But for me, I always think about technology as a double-edged sword, right? So I can get excited about the benefits, but I also have to think about the risks. So part of that is understanding that it's kind of two sides of the same coin. You can't really just look at the benefits and ignore what those risks are, because part of those risks will, if we can't mitigate them, talk about them, figure out how to get around them, it will really stop the adoption of these types of technologies.
So, Debbie, I'm hearing that, in terms of thinking about it and saying, there's always risk and there's promise, and I'm going to come to Laura because you hear about, well, what tool will enable me to do that, right? How can I lock information down in a world that's ubiquitously connected? Laura, blockchain, its promise, talk a little bit about how you, when you're talking with, your current clients and customers and prospective ones, how you feel you can help mitigate that risk to where the folks can sleep well at night knowing that their data is protected.
Yep. I'll give you a little of a sort of a small use case I think everyone can sort of understand is, take some of these parts of these antiquated parts like the B-1 and B-2 bombers, right? And large companies like Lockheed might not want to print these things because it's just too small of a contract. Well, there's other organizations willing to take these flat files from flat files to digital abstract. But then think about having to print these parts, whether it be a B-1, B-2 bomber or an aircraft part, and someone actually tampering with just a slight derivation of the amount of titanium and how that could affect the sky. So I do think there's so many opportunities like that that we're going to be seeing, but at the same time, there's certainly risk. And, coming again from Wall Street, risk is in the data, and it's sometimes down to that lowest bit level. You ask generals what's their fear, and their fear is that there will be bombing a child or a hospital and not a tank. And that can be just with data tampering, at the edge. So I think there's so much opportunity with big data and AI growth, but with it comes a lot of risk, and it's going to be happening at the edge that you need to have ingrained platforms.
Yeah, and I appreciate and can respect that. I spent a good bit of my time in government, and every tool that was at least demoed, my one question was, what makes you unique? What makes you special? And how does this meet the specific mission of my agency? And I know in the prep calls you address that's one of your components when you're talking with a federal agency. You respect it. In the 400 plus agencies that are out there, every mission is unique. And who better to explain that and talk a bit about that when we get to Becky here in a minute. Thank you, Laura. Michael, the Internet of Things Advisory Board report really had 7 key themes that were really underpinning it. And they range from, number one, at the most basic level, the government leadership, the adoption of the homework that's needed and to modernize infrastructure, establish trust, have a workforce. We talked about that. How do I use some of these tools if I'm even going to touch them? But unlocking the potential of the IoT-enabled economy, right? The benefits and value that we've kind of been hitting on. You've seen a lot of this happen in other countries and the facilitation of adoption. What are some of the barriers, and then what are some of the successes that maybe you could address?
Yeah, that's a big question, Pete. It's also an important one. So we can talk about, and this gets to the trust issue. I think I'll focus on that as kind of the hinge point here. We talk about the trust of the IoT systems, the trust of the communications between IoT devices, knowing that the devices are functioning properly, that they're passing the correct data between point to point. And we saw this in the smart cities world when I first started working. We talked a lot about those kind of technology applications, but the trustworthiness of the technologies themselves are actually a function of something else, and that is to build trust with the data that the IoT devices are delivering. And that data, the trustworthiness of the data itself, is a function of something else. And the function of that is the decision maker, the decision making, the decision systems that is putting that data to use to solve problems and answer questions. But that then gets to a whole nother spectrum, and that is the decision technology or the decision system being used properly, and do we trust the outcome? And do we trust the use of the data system and its application in a decision environment, so that we know that what the public officials, and I'll use public officials in this case, but we could be talking about customers for a technology application, do they trust what they're getting? So starting with the IoT systems, going to data, going to decisions, going to decision architectures and decision makers, and then the outcome that the public is attempting to achieve, there are layers of trust at every stage of that. And so we have to think, this is the old Covey aphorism, start with the end in mind. We have to start the development of the technology by thinking about what it is we want as an outcome. And in the smart city space, but also in the consumer manufacturing space, we have to think about what is going to be attractive, trustworthy, and acceptable to either the public or to the consumer, to the end user. And we have to analyze each of those as a stage in that process, both on the technical side, but also on the economic, the social, and the commercial sector as well.
Okay, so first of all, folks, I tend to interject when I'm hearing some background noise. I don't know if it's ruffling of feathers or it's just me or paper. So if you're not on mute, not necessarily these folks, just let's not disrupt the conversation if we can. Becky, you're hearing this. You're in the government. You meet with vendors and folks, I'm sure quite often, are your team, and there's always something new and cool. And then there's some ONB guidance, or there's an executive order, there's some legislation. How do you, as a CIO in the NWS with a very unique special mission, kind of grapple with and start the process of, it may be cool, but it may not be ready for prime time? Talk about some of that process you put in, and for our audience specifically, the kind of things you want to hear when folks come to you to talk about a capability.
Yeah, sure. So it always goes back for me to needing to, as a technologist, to actually understand the mission outcomes that we are trying to achieve. And then, as we take a look at whatever that new capability might be, given the mission, when it comes to operationalizing something, we're very concerned about making sure there's not going to be impact to that. But then sometimes that translates into the dev side as well, where you want to take more risk to be able to try to fully test something out or innovate in new ways. And I can give you some examples of what we're trying to do today in regards to that, which has a lot to do with, I think you mentioned that one of our biggest transformations that we recently made is a focus on decision making. So we want to have the absolute best forecast watch or warning possible, whether it's, a storm or it's supporting the Super Bowl, right? And it's a great day, it's going to be cold or whatever. So we consider those to be critical weather days. Those are time frames where we cannot make any technology changes during a critical weather day because of the potential that it could cause an issue or, damage an IT system, or just, you got to roll back a patch or something. So, but one of the things we've decided to do is now take a look at how do we embrace digital transformation and leverage the cloud, leverage AI, and not be so risk adverse, but actually leaning in and then building more resilient systems that can kind of withstand that, because today we still aren't quite there. And the edge compute. I think one of you guys mentioned that because, we do have a lot of sensors and information that comes in, and we're starting to look at like data now has gravity as opposed to let's just ship data all around the place. But how can we better leverage it either where it lives or putting it in more of a centralized place with metadata? Because a lot of the weather enterprise depends on the weather data that my entity and the National Weather Service creates, as well as other components of NOAA. That's just critical to enable that enterprise to do what they do best, which is disseminate information to the public. And I'm not sure if I answered all of your questions there.
No, you
but,
did. No, you're painting the picture. I mean, as a CIO, and maybe again, this is for, again, Laura and Debbie and Michael, we're not, jump in if you have a question or comment, because we're all hearing from you, Becky. You're a CIO. You're the person everybody wants to meet, and sometimes you may do some analysis, you may buy something, but what you're doing specifically at National Weather Service, the adoption of the demonstrations, how do you work with industry? And I guess this is a follow-on, is you need tools to do certain things. There might be some data that you need that you can't get at. And you talked about your legacy systems are not being, torpedoed just because some new tools there. So you have a lot to think about when you think about architect investment plan. Kind of paint that picture of the process for you when you have that opportunity to really sit down with an industry partner and understand what is it that your capability is that we need here at the Weather Service.
Right. Which is exactly where I'm at today. Like we were sitting down to talk about a NOAA-wide data mesh potential strategy, and we've got industry partners there at the table, like talking to us what's currently capable out there, and with some of those big major providers of cloud services or data services. So, it's definitely a partnership, and, the more you can exchange like what your future vision is, because we at one point were very focused on delivery of a data product or an outcome of a model. The hurricane forecast, for this upcoming season looks like XYZ. And now it's also about enabling decision makers to make the best decisions and take the right actions, and the protection of lives and property. So we do analysis after those events, like what did we do well? What could we do better? And more and more, it was that we were like really doing great work with our people and our our scientists and the meteorologists, but we were not enabling them as well as we could have with our technology and our technology decisions. There was a huge focus on mission delivery, and then IT kind of being that like, we should probably build this IT system. Today, we are now doing more IT architecture and governance and big picture decision making. And one of the best things that we did as technologists is embed ourselves into the mission side of the house and understand the outcome they wanted. So we like totally redid our operation, what we call an ops model on the mission side. And our IT folks are now at the table assisting them with, okay, now what you want to do is cut the cord. We want to have a forecaster out, in California with the firefighters, providing them boots on the ground decision making and information about the weather that could potentially impact that forest fire or that wildfire that they're fighting. The same thing, with, an emergency operations center spun up in New York City or in the state of New York because of a major snowstorm. So we're now like, want to cut the cord essentially so that those folks, no matter where they are, they have access to the IT systems and the technology and the information and data that they need in order to deliver the mission as best they can.
So let me jump to Laura. Laura, you hear this from a CIO, and can you frame a bit about, and we talked about this. I know you're not in sell mode, but what your value proposition, right, to meet that need of information in the hands of the people to make those life-saving situations in some case, making sure data is protected. To Debbie's point at the onset, do you have a comment on what Becky's saying?
No, I think what Becky said, one thing is, we have to start doing things where the data lives. One really nice, unique piece of architecture behind the private blockchain is that two nodes always want to be equal and they have perfect replication. That can be from the cloud to on-prem. That's their almost their job in life. And that's a powerful thing on top of the provenance and the ability not to delete on the chain. It sort of went into what you also said, Michael, is we have to have layers of trust. We have layers of architecture. You know, we built ourselves to even be side by side because we came from Wall Street to buy the old mainframes or old architecture because we do have legacy systems and technical debt, and we can't have people re-architecting, right? I mean, if people are not building containerized microservices architecture today, then they're missing the boat. If they're building something cloud first, they're missing the boat. And I think that we have to sit where the data lives. And I just heard Microsoft's video. If you guys haven't seen it, they really talked about data living on the edge. And I do think as many government clients are moving into the cloud, many people are going to have to be thinking faster of living on that edge. And then how can we replicate in different environments? And that's a nice piece of what our technology does in an enterprise technology. But it's really one of that components is the blockchain. And I think that, whether you like him or not, I think Elon Musk is moving things to the blockchain. China is putting a lot of data on the chain, and we had a lot of failed architectures from the chain that have made people scared. But I think it's time now, which I think is a good thing, because I do think it adds a level of security and data integrity.
So appreciate that. Debbie, blockchain, you hear it and some people are like, I don't get it. I don't want to use it. But if you read a little, peel back the onion, it's frankly not the most complicated thing to understand. And I'm not the smartest tack in the room, but you're hearing a CIO talk about, the due diligence, doing the homework, coming in and giving us a tool that can have mission impact. And you got a business owner in Laura who's like, we have something, it can work. And then there's the ultimate, somebody could say, whoa, I want to know how do you protect the data? How do you, again, hearing this, address, or what would you say to somebody in their doing their preparation, their homework, or their market analysis? How can we think about data privacy not being the thing that will, kill the conversation?
Yeah, it should be an enabling factor in the conversation. And I love the fact that Becky said data has gravity. That's a very apt analogy to say, right? And so I think in the future, we're going to have to be very concerned, not just with data provenance, right? So data provenance is sort of where the data came from, where it originated from, why you have it, and things like that. But then you have to really think about that lineage. So how does the data travel throughout whatever system it is going to? What is it being used for? What is the end of life data? And I'm including actual devices with this as well. What is that strategy going to look like, right? And so that's the part that I feel that a lot of people lose track of, especially in IoT. So let's say you get a device, you get something that you're going to be using, some type of connected system, and you're very good at, collecting data, or very good at onboarding it, but the device is changing, right? So you're updating the device, technology is changing, you're using for different things. Sometimes the plot gets lost as the data moves further down, further, downstream, and as the data, gets used by different people and different for different reasons. So, the privacy conversation should, in my view, should be more of that early conversation, right? So, what are we using data for? What's the purpose? And if the purpose can travel with the data, you'll be in a much better place so that it's not a blocking factor near the end.
So let me riff off that and come to Michael, and it's for everybody, right? The conversations, the strategies, people in the same room. We got a lot of folks in the federal government that have C in front of their title. We got chief AI officers, responsible AI officials, chief privacy officers, chief data officers, chief information officers. We all know, and those listening hear it quite often. Oh, we all got to get in the room, be at the table, make decisions. That's eloquent. Doesn't happen that often, but I love what you said about it, data integrity and privacy being an enabler for realizing the innovation and opportunity. Michael, you've seen cities adopt technologies, right? The federal government isn't a city, but it has a governing role. It has an influential role. Can you talk, briefly about maybe a case where it kind of has come together, and even if it's challenging, you have that leadership at the top, and then people saying, let's move the needle, and if we fail, we'll fail fast.
Yeah, Pete, that's a really good question. I'm going to use a quote out of your document here, the IoT Advisory Board. This is key recommendation number 1. Okay. Congress and the executive branch should work together to establish a United States national strategy for taking full advantage of the opportunity presented by the IoT. I think in a nutshell that, well, actually at the federal level, that is the power that agencies in the federal government, but also the drivers of the IoT technology integration. That's the real power that we have, is to be able to build strategies that can be applied from the national level and scaled down all the way to the local level. I posted in the chat block, I posted 4 documents from NIST that we have developed over the last, really about the last 3 years, 4 years or so, that address things like key performance indicators for smart cities and communities. There's another one which probably everybody's familiar with in this group. The NIST Cybersecurity Framework, 2nd edition, has now been released, or was released a year ago. We have an AI risk management framework and a strategic plan for smart cities. The point of all of this is that this is the power that government has, is to set the agenda for standardization and for adoption that will make IoT systems, frankly, talk to one another, and that will identify the ability of one region. Again, I'll talk about the city problem. One of the current areas that we're working in is how to build resilient communities that can scale across regions and even states, because as we are seeing, the disaster management problem that nations, or that rather that communities are facing, stretch way beyond jurisdictions. And how we integrate those kind of decision systems and the sensor systems, whether it's weather, whether it's flood control, whether it's transportation management or supply chain management, all those systems have to integrate. And the ability to integrate and to set a standard that will permit integration is really something that has to take place at the federal, state, and in some cases at local jurisdiction level. But the goal is to standardize the potential for these systems to operate with one another.
So let me jump in and just riff. Michael's put a lot of links. Folks, I've read these documents just because I have, and they're a wealth of knowledge. There's use cases galore, and that's what we're trying to do today, is give you a taste, a sampling from a perspective on how you have to market to the government mission, how you need to consider that sale or that message that says, my tool can have impact, but you have to do your homework and you have to come prepared. And even if someone like Becky, I know I'm a 25 years in government guy, used to sit at the table with vendors all the time and say, this is the greatest thing. And then when they leave, I go, who do I bring this information to? So Becky, let me come down to you. There's all this guidance. Michael's laid it out. He's one of those folks who can be an ambassador for IoT and the like. And of course, Debbie, you do the same thing in the wonderful city of Chicago and globally and on your podcast. And Laura, you're meeting with the Defense Department and, you know, critical sectors. Becky, when it comes down to the federal government is tightly aligned with the 16 most critical sectors in our country. Things that oversee the grid, that oversee our aviation, that oversee the drinking water. You know, here you are as a CIO, a technologist in the Department of Commerce, you know, in that hierarchy at the National Weather Service by way of NOAA. Can you talk a little bit about, or at least impress upon the audience here, what is it you want to leave a demonstration with, given that your time is valuable? What do you say to industry when they come to you with a product in terms of, I'm interested enough to want to take this to another level? What do you expect from industry?
That's a really good question. I wanted to make a point though on something that Michael said when he was talking about smart cities. So maybe as I talk about the story a little bit, that'll kind of come to light. But one of the things I realized at a conference a couple of years ago, they were talking about digital twins and the metaverse and all of that, right? Like that was before AI kind of got on the hype cycle. And I'm thinking like, I'm in the weather service. Why do I care about that? And then it struck me that how cool would it be if we had our hurricane forecast, for example, enabled to kind of go into the Orlando, smart city stuff, because I think they have a really cool digital twin that's in the metaverse as well, and actually see what that forecast could do in that state and in that city specifically to, image like what that will look like. what is it going to look like, that much rain, coming down in that city, in those streets, given the current infrastructure that's in place there. And the things that vendors can bring to us to like help by understanding the mission outcomes we're trying to achieve, that's going to lead to our being interested in like to partner with them. For example, we recently partnered with a company who does some AI work with language translation. And, a forecast or a warning, us being able to quickly take that and translating it into other languages that, where it's understandable, right? Like, because you can do like a word for word translation and the whole meaning is completely lost. So, so we were able to work with them. So those models are constantly learning how to better translate. And so we were able to now, like, we're still kind of in some prototyping mode with that, but multiple dialects or different versions of Spanish, like that's been so impactful on the delivery of the mission outcomes we were hoping to achieve, where we're able to reach more and more communities.
Yeah, I'm gonna call that out. As we talk a lot about meetings and having meetings. Michael, I'm sure you too, and Laura, look, you want more meetings, and Debbie, you probably hear the same thing, that there's a meeting to sit around the table. I think if we could have more of the brainstorming, get in there and find out what it is that Becky needs as a CIO, and she may not have the answer, but she sure as heck could probably figure out in the National Weather Service, how to address an AI situation or a language translation. So I appreciate that coming from a CIO and a component perspective versus it being, hey, the document says you must do this and blockchain's a requirement, so go find a tool. I think, Laura, to your point, and let's get ready to kind of start thinking about, how we want to and what we want to leave with the audience. As I see some questions come in, I might ask it. Laura, you have a capability in hearing Becky. What do you say to that when it comes to how you prepare for that brainstorming meeting with the Fed?
Yeah, I mean, I think to hone in on something Debbie said too, and Michael and Becky is, so the holy grail, I believe, is taking data from all these IoT devices, land, air, and sea, right? Having one source of the truth, guaranteeing that trust down to the data element, to the bit level, right? To be able to have decision advantage in national security, lives are at stake, and economic security, money is at stake, as well as potentially another collapse. So I think that understanding that it's all kinds of data that needs to be secure, we need to be able to sit side by side to these HVAC systems that control missile systems. We need to figure out that next generation enterprise structure, and we can't be scared of it because change is critical. Our current enterprise architecture does not work. So let's just talk about AI for 5 seconds. We think about AI, we think about the data sources, multiple sources, who's touching that data, who's checking that data out, where and who has the authority to take that data out. And then we've got obviously the training of that data and the inferences and the model and so forth. And 6 months later, when you want to use that model, I always go back to my Wall Street days and I say, you're putting proprietary model money at stake. And on that CEO, has anyone tampered with that training? Is there any AI poisoning? Has anyone tampered with that model? How do I know that I'm going to put money at risk and know that this truly is what you think it is? And how can I feel that confidence? I think if we can nail that and then put these semantic knowledge graphs on at a natural language level, we're going to be in a good place. But if we don't, and we don't ding, ding, ding those guys in the network that are sitting in our network and are trying to get into every one of our IoT devices, then we might have more problems against some of our big adversaries that are inside our infrastructure. So I'd like to leave that. Think of new enterprise technology. Utilizing blockchain is one component. Don't be scared of it, right? Embrace it. It is a big component of, I think, the next gen architecture of AI on the edge, which is probably where success will happen.
I appreciate that preliminary parting shot, but I'm going to give you a shot at another because I just wanted to ask Debbie a quick question on what you've heard. Deb, just in about a minute or less, I want to leave about 5 minutes for folks to kind of summarize what they want to leave with the audience, hint, hint, foreshadowing. But we're seeing some of the folks, you know, Mike Burkholz, thank you for sharing exemplars of how to think about the IoT. Again, folks, this is not something that you just go out and buy. I mean, IoT is, you know, we hear about the volume, velocity, variety, veracity of data. And Debbie, if I can, the question is, it's almost gargantuan and scary to think, I know there's a lot of data. I'm glad we have devices at the edge, but I have to make sense of it. And I know you've hit on some of that. And I know that's what you do. You help companies go through that process of thinking. But in what you've heard, not in your parting shot, do you have a perspective, not being in the federal government or necessarily selling a product, how people could think about this gargantuan problem that doesn't have to be so massive?
Absolutely. I think part of it is really truly defining, asking the right question and defining what your true problem is. So the way that these devices are made and the way manufacturers want to make them is that they want to be able to sell these products to anyone, right? And so it puts more of the onus and more of the pressure on whoever buys the products or implements those products to decide what they want those products to do. And also what's happening is that there's just going to be rapid acceleration in the capability changes in these devices like we've never seen before, right? So maybe you have something that they used to change, maybe maybe every 3 years there was a major change, or every year there was a major update. Now we're seeing updates to these devices every couple of months, some major capability. So I think it's going to be incumbent upon anyone who is, buying and implementing these things to really think about, let's say the thing that did 20 things, maybe there are only 10 things you want it to do. Maybe those other 10 things you don't want it to do, right? So it's going to put more onus and more pressure on people who are adopting these technologies to really think through what they want it to do, because they want to be able to answer the problem that they have and also limit their risk.
Appreciate that big time. And I just wrote down as you all were talking, my preliminary parting shot, which is probably going to end up being thank you for your wonderful time, is this thing of asking questions, right, on government and industry. I'm a proponent of getting a meeting with the Fed as an opportunity for them to talk. And Feds, it's incumbent on all of us, former and current, tell them what they need to know to make sure the conversation is of value. But what's the problem you're trying to solve? Who needs data? And what purpose will that data serve and enable? That's what I've gleaned from this discussion, which I think can get folks thinking about how can we then architect a city in the future and have it so that we have no loss of life or mitigate that risk. Okay, let's go around the room here. Michael Dunaway, parting shot, 45 seconds or less.
45 seconds or less. Okay. There's an analogy I would like to pass on to everyone. So think back to the automobile manufacturing and the road systems development in 1925. 1925, all those grainy black and white movies you've seen. And 100 years later, here we are with an interstate system of transportation, IoT devices that are beginning to develop, being embedded in autonomous vehicles. We have a significant environmental impact as a result of the petroleum industry that was being driven to build all that transportation system. So the question for us relative to IoT, which is just now an emerging industry, what do we want to drive to as a goal in 100 years? Because eventually the nation is going to get there. And we are laying that foundation now as surely as Henry Ford and the people that were developing electrification were building back in 1925. Had no idea what was going to take us, but we need to be thinking like that.
Yes, well said, well said. Laura, parting shot.
Don't be scared of blockchain. Crypto was the biggest distractor to the biggest disruptor, which is blockchain. We need guaranteed data integrity. Without it, we can't make decisions.
Wonderful. Miss Reynolds, the data diva from Chi-Town. Parting
Thank you.
shot.
Thank you, Pete. I would say think about end of life of a connected system, end of life in terms of a data strategy. This is where a lot of the risks that people have come. You have to really think about it. So we're really great at collecting data, and we're really great at finding different ways to use it. But data has a life cycle, it has a cradle to grave, arc, and we need to really be thinking about that end of life strategy in order to, reduce the cyber and privacy risks.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Before we close out with Miss Becky Kunji, Kirk, I love your note. Please, guests, take a look at that. And if you want to reach out to Kirk or Kirk, we can make some connections for you. Becky, parting shot.
Yeah, so I think what I would say is that we are at another historical crossroads, especially as far as technology, right? Like in the 2000, I remember 1999, we thought everything was going to crash, as we changed over to 2000. But the 2000s were the year of the internet and the explosion of how that changed and shaped us, not only as the federal government, but as a country, and how, and what we were able to do with that tool. And we were really afraid of it initially, right? Today it's AI. And I think AI is going to be transformative in the 2020s and beyond. There's so much we could do with it. There's so much positives. And, of course, there's some risk there. We've got to be cognizant of that and manage it, but not be afraid of something new that's coming our way. We need to also be able to be ready to embrace it, within the bounds of, what's secure and how to best meet the needs of the communities at large. So I think, data is also our biggest asset. I'm sure Debbie's giving me hearts, but that is really the asset of every company. And it's the asset of the federal government, and us leveraging ways to deliver that asset in the right ways instead of just moving it around and making copies of it is going to be really critical to our success in the future.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Michael, Becky, Debbie, Laura, all those who attended, those who couldn't attend but registered, we will be summarizing and doing it in case you missed it. I appreciated the conversation. There's so much more we could spend time on, but hopefully this was a taste. It is truly something that the government, I feel, again, is embarking on. And, what's underpinning our lives? This Internet of Things. And let's do our best to educate, inform, and enlighten those that we come in contact with. Thank you for your time, everybody. Have an awesome rest of your day.